Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Blazing a Trail podcast. This is a dedicated Salesforce podcast where I speak to individuals with inspirational stories within the ecosystem. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Magda Borek. Magda made a fairly radical career change from a nurse to now a Salesforce admin over the last 6 months or so. But obviously she put in a lot of work to get to that place prior to that. And I get so many people who come to me and have maybe sort of had a little bit of an intro to Salesforce previously, or a friend spoken to them about it, and they're keen to find out more and maybe dedicate themselves to having a Salesforce career, but don't really know how to go about it and the steps they should take to get to the position that Magda's in now. So hopefully Magda can share some of her wisdom as to how she's got to the place where she is now. So thanks for joining us, Magda. Do you want to give a little bit of an overview as to your background in a little bit more detail?
Sure. Hi, Zach. Thanks for having me. So like you said, a radical change in career. I was previously a nurse. Actually worked in a hospital setting for almost 16 years before I changed career. Previously worked as a part-time like a housekeeper / healthcare assistant. I then went to university, studied nursing, finished, rather qualified. And then I started a new job at Harefield Hospital, which was an amazing opportunity for me. I loved it. I started to work at ITU. However, I think what happened was that, obviously, as we're all aware, COVID hit. I think I was not only tired with the 13, 12 and a half hour shifts, night shifts, always on demand. We were quite strict on how we could take annual leave. It was a very rough time for nurses. I think that was, for me, when I've decided that maybe I needed a change. So I think that was when I first realized I wanted to change a career. I then was introduced to Salesforce through my partner 3 years ago, actually. Obviously, as we started going out, he mentioned Salesforce. This is, a platform he works for. This was a CRM he used. Didn't really take much note of it. You just like early stages, like, what do you do? I work with computers. Great. That was me. But then I think later down the line, as I started to feel a bit burnt out, I think there was an opportunity actually within the trust that I worked for to be granted like a secondment, like a 6 months paid term where you go and work in other departments. And it was actually for an IT department. And I remember coming back home and speaking to Andrew and, saying that, I'm feeling this way and I'm kind of tired of the shift work and the nights and being on demand like Easter, Christmas, bank holidays. And that's something I explored. And I think Andrew then repeated, like, if you want to go into IT, why don't you just try Salesforce and like really try to sell it to me? For the right reasons. I think Salesforce is amazing now. I then sat down. I remember like sitting down with Andrew and like drawing like a table of pros and cons and going through, pros of staying within the NHS. I think the option was to go private or just like change of career. And I think at that point, I realized that I guess I'm of the age that I kind of want to settle down with a 9 to 5 and, be home for weekends and not being on demand on Christmas and bank holidays. And I think that's when I've made a decision to look into becoming a Salesforce admin.
Yeah, no, great. And thanks for that overview. And I mean, I know sort of many people obviously have been affected over the last few years with what's happened. So full credit to you for what you did previously, and I'm sure you stuck it out longer than certainly I I would have done. But now obviously made a cool career change into sort of the world of IT, which we'll obviously cover a little bit more in this sort of podcast. So obviously you mentioned that it sounded like it was a bit of a slow burner, sort of initially thinking about sort of getting into Salesforce, and Andrew sort of poking with a stick most days, being like, "Look at this great tool. You should get involved in this and dedicate yourself to that." From sort of obviously the point when you sort of had that IT secondment, and then you were like, right, this is sort of what I want to do moving forward. And once you decided that, what were sort of, I guess, your next steps from there to understand sort of more about Salesforce and get to the point where you are now, where you're employed as a Salesforce administrator?
So just to clarify, I never actually ended up applying for the secondment. I went straight to Trailhead as Andrew directed me. He was like, "Oh, check out this, this cool free website that you can learn Salesforce from." And pretty much from then on, I kind of fell in love with it, with the gamified, easy learning, like on demand, right? You can learn whenever you're free. I'm quite competitive, so I enjoy collecting points and getting badges and, getting my first super badge and whatnot. So that was really exciting for me, I guess. And then I then made a decision to, I made a decision a while back to change a career, and I knew the next step in order to make that change. I felt I needed to maybe stand up a little more. I knew I could go to university and maybe get a degree. But then again, I spoke to my partner, and he told me that Salesforce would enable me potentially with the right credentials to land my first job within Salesforce. So going back to Trailhead, I spend a lot of hours doing trails, trying to basically learn another language. I've always been good with computers, but I'm not a wizard. I can use Word and Excel and simple tools, but I'm not like a tech. So that was really easy for me in a way, but also difficult at the same time. As I said, learning another language, going through trails, and I think with Trailhead, it's easy because it's step by step, and it guides you to another trail. And then you can find it by, if you search for admin trails, it gives you all the trails that you need to do in order to prepare for your first exam. So at that point, I made a decision to take my exam to maybe give myself a bit of a head start, or allow myself to stand out a bit more between other applicants. So I guess, Trailhead is the way forward, I think.
You've landed on a really great point there, Magda, and something that I didn't tee you up to say, and refers sort of back to the last podcast, which if you haven't listened to that one, I definitely recommend checking that one out. Guy in that episode, he's somebody who became a certified technical architect all without going to university. And obviously you touched upon potentially thinking about going back into education, but Salesforce doesn't discriminate and has allowed you to land a Salesforce role without any sort of necessarily previous relevant qualifications, which is great. How long would you say it was from sort of first jumping on Trailhead to then sort of being at a point where you were like, right, I'm ready to tackle sort of a formal certification?
I think it's interesting that you asked me that, because I initially started doing Trailhead, I think December 2021. That's when I made a decision that this is serious, I'm going for it. This is I need to learn this. I spend many hours. I know I've listened to a few podcasts and I've watched a lot of YouTube channels, and people would say, oh, give it 3 months and you should be able to, you should be ready to take the exam. I guess for me, maybe because of the job that I was previously in and the shift work. Like, I took my first exam in May the following year, so 6 months later, but I failed. So I failed that one. I really thought I was ready, and I went into the exam, bought the exam room, and it was at the center. I was obviously quite stressed, probably overthinking, and I failed that exam, and I felt really demoralized. But I kind of, from that point, I realized what I've made a mistake, or what I felt like a bit overconfident. I was obviously in a way devastated that I didn't pass that exam, because I really wanted this, obviously, like everyone else, right? And I felt I was ready. But then after reviewing my mistakes, I just went back to the drawing board, and I kind of picked up on what I was doing. I used focus on force as my theory learning point, and I used Trailhead obviously as my practical hands-on. And I've realized even though I spent a lot of time on Trailhead, I didn't have enough practical knowledge to kind of join them together and then, be able to, from my point of view, answer the questions correctly. So again, I went back to Trailhead. I did a lot of super badges. I did a lot more trails. I then sat the exam in August, which was 8-9 months after I've initially started. And I passed the exam, and I've passed with a good mark. So I think just, going back and reviewing my mistakes has helped me a lot. Just like being able to join the theory with the practice, that's worked for me. So yes, to answer your question, I think 8 months when I personally felt, maybe longer than an average, but it's obviously what worked for me.
Yeah, and I think there's, like you said, that worked for you, and there's no right answer here, right? And you, like you said, you took in sort of various advice via sort of blogs and YouTube channels and that kind of stuff, and maybe they advised on different timescales, but everyone's different. And obviously, sort of being in a highly stressful job like you were, that was taking up a lot of your time as well, obviously the amount of time that you could spend to learning and Trailhead and that kind of stuff is probably going to be radically different from maybe somebody who has more time on their hands and is not sort of in full-time employment or doing something else. So everyone's different, and it takes more sort of time than for some than others. But full credit to you as well, and your resilience for not giving up and throwing the towel in with Salesforce after that failed first time around, and sort of taking on board that feedback and seeing what areas you needed to improve and learn upon, and then sort of go again sort of 3 or 4 months later and pass that time around. And it's something that I guess I speak to individuals about when they ask me sort of their advice as to things, or my advice as to things they should do to sort of start their career or put themselves in the best place possible. And something that you've nicely touched upon there is combining both that theoretical knowledge and essentially Trailhead with the commercial experience as well. And that's, whilst Trailhead is amazing and great, it doesn't sort of quite replace being able to get commercial experience and hands-on with a real life org if you can. And there are ways that you can do that without being employed by somebody and paid by somebody. Obviously, you mentioned that you use focus on force. I know a lot of people that say volunteer at non-profit organizations, and that gives them access to those commercial orgs and a real life org to play around with and see sort of what knowledge they don't potentially have or what mistakes they make, that they can then sort of refer to training material, Trailhead, etc., to sort of reaffirm their knowledge and then be in a better place to potentially sort of sit a certification or pursue sort of the employment. So that was sort of back in August. You mentioned that you landed that sort of certification. Was it sort of then straight after that you were kind of like, right, I've got the cert now, I've done a lot of work with Trailhead, I'm now sort of ready to try and attack the job market and see if there's anyone out there who could utilize my skills?
Pretty much. I think my CV was ready from, I would say, end of May. I was kind of getting ready to retake that exam, but obviously summer, you take some time off. Plus, I really I felt like I needed to make a lot of notes in order to, understand Salesforce a lot more. So that took a lot of time. I've sent out a few CVs in between May and August, mostly with no replies, or some companies would just say, they're looking for someone more experienced. So then I kind of, just waited until I get my certification in order. And I think the following day, I went on LinkedIn, searched every single Salesforce admin position that was sort of applicable, obviously, a junior position, applied for those, and then, carry on then after.
Yeah, no, got you. And you mentioned there was sort of, say, a few applications or CVs that you shared sort of between May and August, and then sort of post that and applying to those roles that you felt were relevant from August onwards. Were you getting sort of any kind of response from those applications? Was there any sort of feedback that you were getting on those sort of applications as to sort of interest or not interested by sort of your profile and your skills?
Truthfully, a lot of resumes that I sent out I never actually got a reply for. The ones that I did, I was offered, I was invited to 2 interviews with 2 different companies rather, and the rest was either, as I said, no reply at all, or just, oh, sorry, we will keep your, the position is now filled in by someone else, but we'll keep your application for the next however many months, 6 months, 3 months, for future references or something. So that was typically what I would receive. Yeah.
And I think you made a couple of great points there, and it is, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It is a challenge for people, say, with your skills and experience, who are new to the Salesforce world, to get that first rung on the ladder. Once you get that first rung on the ladder, you're pretty well set after that. But sort of the first step is the most challenging. So it is important to cast your net as wide as possible. And like you said, there was sort of quite a long time even prior to the certification where you were sharing your CV, and then there was sort of jumping on LinkedIn and various job boards and looking at every single role that you felt was relevant to you and you could add value to, that you're applying to. And off the back of however many applications you got, there was then sort of a couple that were interested in having those initial conversations with you and potentially giving you that opportunity to get that foot in the door. I will sort of caveat as well that obviously, luckily, I knew Andrew, and Magda and myself were introduced via Andrew. So whilst I didn't have any roles to share directly with Magda, I was able to leverage my network a little bit, and I put out a post on LinkedIn that then generated some responses, and Magda sort of got an introduction sort of via that. But that's not a plug for myself or my services, but just another thing that I'd add and recommend to anybody who's in a similar position to Magda is definitely sort of connecting with not only, say, recruiters such as myself, but also maybe some senior individuals within the ecosystem who have a strong network and are able to maybe share any content or share your CV with potentially sort of relevant individuals, etc., to then sort of give yourself another opportunity and another window to create that sort of initial introduction and end up where Magda is now. So I think via that, Magda, you mentioned that I think you had sort of three sort of conversations or three sort of interviews in your sort of search process. How did those sort of go, and was there sort of any feedback that you got from maybe the couple that you weren't successful on that was sort of represented gaps in your knowledge or areas that you needed to go back on?
So the initial 2, I think they were pretty similar, in a similar situation. In a job description, it wasn't exactly very clear. They after the interview, or even during the interview, they actually mentioned that they need someone quite experienced. They need someone to even though the job referred to like a junior Salesforce admin, they really, like what I gathered during the interview, seemed like they wanted someone a lot more experienced, someone who would take over a brand new org and, you know, implement a lot of changes and just look after the new org. So that was the two of them. I think the feedback that I received from those interviews, just like, I think one of the companies just said they're looking for someone more experienced, which I kind of knew, you know, as I said, I found that during the interview. And the other company, I think they just said, they said that, as you can, they said that I didn't interview particularly well. Obviously, it was quite a stress. It's, I guess, to my, you know, to not give an excuse, but I came from a profession where, you know, my job interview used to look like, when can you start, right? To a profession where, you know, I need to sit one in front of a computer, which I'm not entirely comfortable with. I think I interact a lot better face to face. And two, you know, a long process of like 3, 4, 5 interviews. And I mean, I understand their feedback and I do appreciate it. I think over time I've become a lot more comfortable with the camera. Obviously try to be a bit more eloquent about answering the questions, you know, trying to manage my nerves a bit more. It's all still very work in progress, but yeah, I think I appreciated the feedback. I think the best feedback I actually received was from one of the recruiters from a consulting company. I applied for a job and it was more like a, you know, phone call conversation. They tried to gather a bit more information. He was very straightforward with me and I did appreciate it. He was like, you know, it's a consulting company and like most likely most companies would need some sort of experience. So why don't you, like you said, go ahead and like, you know, try some non-profit companies and see if you can volunteer or land yourself a first part-time maybe position somewhere. And then, you know, gain some sort of live org experience. And from then on, I kind of like, you know, changed my direction. I started looking at non-profit companies, you know, making connections, like you said, making a lot of connections on LinkedIn and, you know, looking at the content they post and like what sort of things I could learn, what sort of things I could maybe have a potential input towards. And just, yeah, just networking, I think. Yeah, making a lot of connections.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really tough as well interviewing for something that you don't know masses and masses about. Often you're in 95% of situations you're probably interviewing for a role that you're potentially quite well skilled in and know like the back of your hand, whereas obviously sort of an entry level role for something that you've purely sort of had training sort of on and not had masses of commercial or if any commercial experience with, to then step into that interview scenario and people are asking you about sort of potentially this technology and what you know and that kind of thing is super, super tough and not an easy situation to be in. So I think for my advice for people in that kind of scenario would just to be honest about sort of your situation and what you do and don't know and sort of the steps you take to get upskilled and to learn sort of where there may well be gaps in your knowledge. So it sounds like that you did have some useful feedback through that process that then sort of aided you moving forward, but also can help people sort of potentially in sort of your in your situation in the future as well. But luckily that sort of obviously the third interview was a success, and I know sort of relatively recently you started with GoCardless about 4 or 5 months ago, which is great. And like you said, in that sort of Salesforce administrator stroke kind of sales operations analyst desk kind of role. So tell us a little bit about what that sort of first role for you entails now, Magda, and your current responsibilities.
So yeah, I actually celebrated 3 months yesterday.
Oh, okay, amazing. Congratulations.
Big milestone for me. Seems like I've been there for ages, to be honest. Slight deviation from my initial responsibilities. There was an opening for support manager position, which I've actually been offered. So I look after the BAU now, business as usual. So my responsibilities vary between, like, user management, assigning permission sets, and adding users to things like correcting validation rules, really user error, any errors in the system. It is quite broad. There is still a bit of like delegation. We're a team of currently 5. So I kind of need to know my team's strengths and weaknesses and who I can reach out to that could help me with this ticket, or who could help me with that ticket. So yeah, my responsibilities are quite broad currently. Not gonna lie, first 3 months has felt quite overwhelming. I think for what I mean, from what you've mentioned, just working with a live org. Trailhead is great, don't get me wrong, it's amazing. I've learned so much through Trailhead, but it kind of like babies you in a way. Every time you've got a different trail or a module, it tells you to create a new org, right? Because some things might interact with something you might create over here. There's none of that in a live org. You're trying to test something and you've got this flow triggered because of this. You've got this validation rule firing because of this. So in that sense, I was never kind of prepared for this, but it's all fun. There's a lot of learning. I've learned so much. Honestly, in the last 3 months working with a live org, I feel like I've learned so much more than I have in probably 6 months going through Trailhead. So, as much as Trailhead is a great tool, I think the real learning starts when you land your first position within Salesforce, and just just be ready for this.
And is there sort of anything that you've found, say, whether it be in that first 3 months in your sort of current role, or through sort of through Trailhead, that you found sort of particularly challenging with regards to Salesforce? And you mentioned that don't consider yourself sort of overly technical, but it sounds like sort of you're picking up quite a lot of technical skills with some of the responsibilities that you're performing over the next sort of 3 months. And that's sort of a classic almost imposter syndrome that admins have. They think that they're not technical, whereas actually they are pretty technical, and definitely much more technical than me. If obviously people watching won't have seen this, but it took us about 10 minutes for me to be able to set up my microphone to actually work this podcast. So that shows the technical capabilities I have. But yeah, it's back to the sort of the question. Has there been sort of any part of Salesforce that you've stumbled across so far that you've sort of found particularly challenging? And if so, sort of how have you sort of gone about, I guess, sort of getting around that sort of challenge and sort of being in a more comfortable place with that challenge?
Yeah, there was definitely one thing, and I don't know if anyone else could relate, but like you said, coming from like non-technical background, I didn't exactly understand record types. I didn't see the point of them. I could not get my head around, like, why would I need a separate page layout and different fields for something, that can just be, one of them, right? I just couldn't understand that. So I remember, Googling this, going back to Trailhead, doing the modules again, trying to understand. I guess I didn't understand the whole concept behind it rather than, the technical bit. So that was me. I still couldn't understand it. Maybe it's just me. I didn't, I'm quite fortunate that Andrew is a specialist in Salesforce, right? He's an expert. So I then discussed that with Andrew, and he broke it down to me. And, he said, you could use it when you've got different users with different requirements. And I was like, yeah, makes sense. And we use it quite a lot in the GoCardless. So, you know, that I'm glad I learned that. Now, when I work with a live org, I think my biggest challenge is just honestly testing. And yeah, just like, you know, trying to go around all the validation rules that you trigger and you know, the flows that fire when you try to save a record or something. It's just like, that was never part of Trailhead. Where did it come from? Yeah. So I think that was that has been my biggest challenge currently. Also, I think I would mention just getting to know the business. Like, different companies use different objects. They have their own fields that they create, custom fields, custom objects. They're called different things. So like, I guess I'm trying to, and I've been said, like my colleagues have said that to me many times, just like, you know, give yourself grace trying to learn the business, because it's all very different, you know, out of, you know, the Trailhead isolation where it's just like opportunities and accounts and case and leads. And, you know, you get different objects in the live org and, you know, different buttons that I remember one time I had a ticket that I was trying to figure out. It took me like half an hour trying to figure out how to change a record type. I finally reached out to someone, you know, swallowed my pride, reached out to someone on the team. And I said, oh, I don't know. How do you change this record type? They were like, oh, there's just this button that you're supposed to press. And I was like, okay, great. It was slightly embarrassing, obviously, but I think it just goes with the business. So yeah, I mean, just give yourself grace and take your time to learn the business.
That's great advice for anyone, whether that be somebody with 3 months Salesforce experience, or well, there's no one with 30 years Salesforce experience because I've been around that long, but some 10 years Salesforce experience. That's sort of understanding the nuances of each business is super, super important. And even a business of the same size, same industry, etc., will have their own kooky ways of doing things and using Salesforce, and whatever the business, it won't be the same for each business. So a great point that you've made there. Obviously, you said yesterday 3-month anniversary, which is great. How do you see your sort of role now evolving over the next sort of 12 months or so?
Over the next 12 months, I think just allowing myself time for the time being, just allowing myself time to learn the business and, you know, gain as much knowledge and experience to then hopefully apply this. For the time being, as part of BAU, I think I'm quite fortunate. I am I'm the front, you know, supporter, right? I pick up the tickets and then, you know, I see if there's a pattern to something. I hopefully soon would be able to sort of not only patch things up, right? Fix things up just quickly, just to be able to, in the future, come up with my own solutions to make, you know, sales and marketing lives easier. So I think that's just gaining enough knowledge, gaining enough experience to be able to then take this and improve the end user's experience, the stakeholders' experience within Salesforce. So I think that's for my 12 months.
Cool. And have you got any sort of grand ambitions for sort of even the longer term? I know some people when they first come across Salesforce see the pyramid and be like, right, in 10 years I'm going to be a CTA or something like that. And I don't expect sort of most people to have those sort of ambitions. But have you got sort of a goal or sort of a pathway sort of loosely in mind of where you'd sort of like to be sort of further down the line?
Definitely a CTA is a dream. Yes. I'm not original. I'm just like a boring, you know, like anyone else. CTA, definitely. Something to look forward to. I think currently just like step by step, I'm preparing for my platform app builder, hopefully Sales Cloud next, just trying to gain as many sets as I can, learn as many things as I can. I'm kind of like a person that likes to be confident in something before I go ahead and like fluke and so yeah, just getting as many certs as I can, hopefully.
Yeah. Nice. And look, you've given some really, really great tips around sort of different things people can be doing to put themselves in the best place to land that first Salesforce role, sort of ideally getting exposure to a live org, all the stuff you can do with Trailhead. And if all else fails, get yourself a partner who's a Salesforce architect. That's the other life hack here. But is there anything that we haven't sort of touched upon, Magda, or anything that you feel that we've missed out that sort of would serve as useful advice for say the Magda 6-12 months ago before this role?
I think just maybe slightly boring, but just allow yourself time, and maybe is that a term, like grow thick skin? Like I remember when I first sent out my resumes to companies and I never heard back. I'm like, why have they not replied? This is so unusual. Again, coming from like nursing background, you would typically land at least an interview. Whereas here it's just like, they don't even reply. It's kind of, heartbreaking in a sense. So yeah, just grow thick skin. And I think just maybe don't be afraid to go out there, to put yourself out there in a way, like, reach out to that consultancy or consultant or recruiter. Just reach out to them and make a connection, and meet as many people as you can. And there's also, Salesforce is great. I think I forgot to mention all the events they organize, right? Free events that you can sign up for. Some of them you might have to be part of like a company, but there's like the admin groups within London, and I'm sure like other bigger cities I've looked at, they've also got like an admin group where you can go and meet a lot of people who, just like you, might be struggling to either get their first position, or they are in the first role, and they can share that experience with you, or they know someone who is looking for a job, or who is looking for a Salesforce admin within the industry. So I think just like a lot of networking, I would say, just goes a long way, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, more is better here. I think, and as many people that you can be speaking to and getting in front of gives yourself the best chance of getting that first role. And like I said, thanks so much for joining us, Magda. I think you've given some really good insight as to sort of where you are now and what you're up to, and how you got to that point, and hopefully some really great tips and advice for people that are, say, in your position or were in your position sort of 6-12 months ago, and how they can potentially land that first Salesforce role as well. So thanks so much for joining us, Magda. Really appreciate that. This is episode 3 of the Blazing a Trail podcast. It will be available, I believe, on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Play, and YouTube as well. And we'll be back soon with another episode in a few weeks.